1993 marked the 10th anniversary of Canada's first gamelan orchestra. The word gamelan actually means orchestra. It refers to a collection of bronze instruments native to Indonesia, specifically from West Java, from the Sunda area. The sounds created on these instruments are quite unusual and often haunting. But what makes this group particularly intriguing is their repertoire. As well as performing traditional pieces, they have commissioned contemporary new works, many involving electronics and synthesizers in a combination of Bronze Age meets microchip. It produces some of the most fascinating New Age world music sounds available.
The first time I heard gamelan music, I was spellbound. I didn't really know what to think about it. It was very foreign to my ears, but it's so attractive and so alluring.
First time I heard any gamelan music, it sounded impressionistic. It sounded like Debussy visits Indonesia or something. And it's been refined and refined and refined, and there's a power to that tradition.
It's very evocative. I just found it fascinating.
Many people find gamelan music soothing, I think because of the fact that it does limit its materials far more than many types of Western music, and the overall sound level not being particularly high.
In Indonesia, gamelan is the orchestra, the group, the collection of these instruments is called a gamelan.
Ours is a particular type called the gamelan Duggan, and that comes from the west part of the island of Java. The city where they're made is called Bandung, and the culture is called Sundanese. We're not here to exploit any particular tradition. We have no pretensions that we're performing music the way that Indonesians would perform it in Indonesia.
We are Canadian performers.
Even when we play traditional pieces, we perform it in our manner.
It is unusual to have a group like this in Canada.
The Evergreen Club Gamelan Ensemble was named by its founder, John Siddall.
His inspiration was studying at Mills College in Oakland with Lou Harrison.
John's idea was that his image of Canada included evergreens. And to him, evergreen also has other implications, such as not dying, you know, this kind of eternal quality. It was a symbol of Canada. The word club comes from the idea of a group of people working towards a common goal. Specifically in Bali, each village has a club of musicians who also own their instruments. So it's a kind of a collective idea. John purchased the instruments, which took about 2 years. And the instruments finally arrived in a wooden crate, 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, and the rest is history. It was 10 years ago.
The frames were made by John's father, James Siddall. I think they're Canadian maple. The frames are very different, too, than a traditional approach. You know, ours are very austere and simple, whereas in traditional gamelans, they have very elaborate wood carvings and very bright colors. So it's quite different. It's really the Canadian look. It's a tradition in Indonesia that every gamelan has a proper name. And so the name of this gamelan is Si Pawet, which means the beginning. And it was named such by a friend of John's, and I think it was named for another gamelan that had the same name, which was destroyed in a fire or lost. I'm not sure if I know the story exactly. And so John's friend felt that this really was a beginning in many ways, because he felt it was a reincarnation of the earlier gamelan, and also that it was the very first gamelan to come to Canada, which is kind of a big thing. So it's called The Beginning.
The Sundanese gamelan, as I understand it, is a type of chamber music. It's often played in Java in very confining circumstances for small groups of people. So it's not a big sort of music.
It's the prime example of Sundanese classical music.
You may have a mistake in your part. Count the beats.
That's great.
There's a
When
bar
you feel
in
it
that
against
part
your
that's
quarter notes, man, and
funky.
that section is great. The fours and fives, you're just playing quarter note triplet, right? Yeah.
Dagung refers to the scale itself and also the setup of the instruments. That particular arrangement of the 8 instruments that we use is a Dagung group.
It's a specific kind of scale which is very much part of this ensemble, which only makes sense because since they're bronze instruments, you can't change the scale. It's fixed forever. The history of this type of ensemble goes back about 500 or 600 years. And it used to be in the various courts of West Java. But Dagung is a relatively small ensemble, usually 5 or 6 people. We've augmented it, so we've added a few instruments from other ensembles tuned to our core ensemble so that we get a wider variety of sound. The kachapi, for instance, and the gambang aren't usually found in Dagung, but we decided to include that in our ensemble to increase the palette of sounds for composers, because we concentrate on contemporary music. Commissioning is very important for us because there is no repertoire for Dagung that is contemporary and that is written in the West. So we have to search out pieces from Indonesia, and we also have to ask people, pay people to write works for us. And so far we've had a considerable amount of luck, and we've seen very well-known composers such as Jim Tenney and John Cage, of course, write for us, as well as many local Canadian composers. I think the #1 attraction to contemporary composers with our group is the sound of the instruments. That's #1. That attracts people right away, performers and just general listeners. There's something attractive about metal instruments with that golden gleam. It's also attractive to composers because we take great pains in trying to perform their works as they've written them, and that usually means we like to have at least 2-3 months, if not more, to rehearse new pieces, which may not seem too big a deal, but to composers it's a great luxury.
We have no repertoire but our own, essentially. It's our mix of what happens. If we bring a guest artist in who's playing guitar or computer or flute or harp or whatever, this new element, this new sound is made. If we're playing in the gamelan and we bring in a different percussion instrument, all of a sudden it's a completely different mix, and the listener is taken in another direction. And that's a lot of fun, exploring those possibilities. There are 8 people in the group, 8 very talented people who have a lot of great ideas. And at times in our history, it has functioned somewhat as a cooperative, and it still does to a degree. There's an element of it which I feel has to remain cooperative, and that's critical to the whole issue of the club concept. They have to feel that they have a say in what goes on. So the artistic director is perhaps the overseer, maybe the diplomat, the middleman, but not always overtly the leader. The musicians that are in this group, the spectrum of influences is incredible. Every player brings all of those things into the group. Every player has the freedom to bring those elements and their experiences into it, and we then create something that is unique through those influences. And that's certainly something that we want to continue pursuing as the group develops. The other, of course, obvious aspect to being artistic director is the development of the repertoire. In 1 year, we can range from 4 performances to 12. That's even without touring. If we don't get commissions, it's 95% impossible to have new material because there is very little contemporary music written for Gamelan Duggan. So we're very limited in what we can do. We have to, for the most part, make it ourselves.
There are also some long-term things, developments, for instance, bringing an Indonesian artist to work with us. We want to integrate some of our work with some of the larger musical institutions of the West, with the symphony orchestra. And things like developing a long-term strategy toward commissioning is very important. It comes down to one word, and that is a vision, and keeper of the vision. I think fundamentally, the instruments have something to say to a public at large because they're listener-friendly. And the music can be challenging, the sounds can be challenging. We want to challenge the listener. Yeah. But on the other hand, it's the nature of our instruments that they're inviting rather than challenging. Even when the vocabulary, when the ideas are challenging, somehow the sounds are inviting to an audience. And that's the same true for composers. The instruments of the Gamelan Duggan are bonang, which is the pot gong, mounted on 2 racks, played with sticks. In the same family is the jenglong, which is the larger pot gongs, playing the lower bass type sounds. Then we have the 2 sarons, the peking and the panorus, which are the metallic keyed instruments played with the hammer up at the front of the ensemble. Then we have the gambang, which is the wooden xylophone type instrument played with mallets. We have at the rear of the ensemble the gong and the kampul, the smaller gong, which form the colotomic or the structural basis of the traditional music. We have the kendang, which are the drums, of which we have 4 here, and the players can have as many as they like according to the requirements of the piece. And to round out the ensemble, we have the suling, which is the flute, comes in 2 sizes. And to augment the group, we have a kachapi, which is a string-plucked zither instrument to round out the sound possibilities. In the West, we have the idea of the 3 elements in music: rhythm, melody, and harmony. Well, harmony is limited in our ensemble, let's face it. Melody is somewhat limited because of the ambitus of our scale, which is 5 notes, essentially, with some variations. So we have rhythm. And very early on in the game, composers have chosen to concentrate on rhythmic complexity. And so, as composers would, they listen to performances and they hear, well, this group can really play this incredible complexity. Well, I'm going to do something even more mind-blowing. So one, it's like developing a language. You start off with A, B, C, then you find yourself with Z, and then you start making words and then complex words.
And a composer sees a whole group of percussionists and they go, well, heck, let's get some rhythm happening. And
I've always wanted to do 13 against 7 against 4.
And they'll do it, you know?
It's been done for us.
My piece is called 3 Bagatelles. It's in 3 movements. The first is for electronics alone. The second combines electronics with the suling, the Indonesian flute. And the third movement combines the percussion instruments of the gamelan with the electronic element. The difficulties in writing for a gamelan are of several different kinds. First of all, you have to limit the materials that you use because there are only really 5 notes to the scale available to you. Second, of course, the tuning is entirely different than Western instruments in that it's not tuned to the same pitch. It's about a 1/4 tone sharp. And then, of course, there's the problem that the intervals in the scales are not the same. Some of them are bigger and some are smaller than the intervals in our traditional equal tempered scale. So you have to adjust your instruments, in this case electronic instruments, to that scale because they can't adjust their instruments. They're cast in bronze and that's how they are. I wrote this piece in 1986 and I had to think a bit about how I would combine these Bronze Age Indonesian instruments with, at that time, state-of-the-art electronic music. And I thought I'll start at one end of the spectrum and work my way into the gamelan. So that's basically how I did it. The suling is a lovely, mild, sweet-sounding flute. So the electronics are geared down around this bamboo flute to sort of frame the sound. The third movement is quite difficult for all the players. It really moves quite rapidly, and the rhythms are very complex. They have to stay with the electronics because the electronics can't stay with them. And it's amazing, the musicianship of these people, that they can stay with this electronic part.
There's lots of challenges writing for this kind of music. These instruments, first of all, the tuning of instrument to instrument is not consistent. And then from gamelan to gamelan is not consistent. And then from culture, Indonesian culture to Indonesian culture is not consistent. So you've really got to write for a specific set of instruments in a specific style, first of all. A secondary problem that I've found writing is that the instruments are not really soloistic. You know, the culture from that part of the world is again, more of a homogeneous group effort or a social thing rather than having soloists jump out and play lead lines and then supporting lines like you would think of Western music to be. So those are two of the bigger problems for me. The piece I wrote is called Evocation, Gentle Rain Falling. And the title comes from one of the chapters in the Tao Te Ching, which is a book of philosophy, I guess, from around the 6th century BC, written by a Chinese philosopher named Lao Tzu. It's about the balance of opposites, you know, and keeping everything sort of in a kind of harmony. And if that happens, one of the lines of this book said, gentle rain will fall. And I thought that was really a nice image. I didn't really feel limited by the 5-note system because it sets up a boundary for you to work with as a composer. It's a given that you have to use that, and so you don't think about harmony as much or complexity in terms of, you know, a chromatic kind of harmonic texture. In a sense, when you limit yourself, you're giving yourself a freedom. It's sort of that dichotomy where if you say, okay, I'm just going to use this, then you can be free to express yourself in that context. Some things turn out the way you expect them, and other things don't always turn out the way you expect them. I've had the luxury of playing as a performing member of the band, and so I would bring ideas in, and if something didn't work, I could just throw it away or alter it and get it to a point where it did work. I'm very happy with it. To be honest, it's one of the best things I've ever done. What the Evergreen Club does is very special, I think, because it doesn't really conform to any category or a label. It doesn't fit anywhere. It's strange from a traditional Indonesian perspective, and it's strange from a contemporary Western music perspective. It's strange from a classical perspective, it's strange from a pop music perspective, and yet it has elements of all of these things. In a sense, it could be indicative of what's already happening, a sort of a current or future wave in music, which is the bringing together of different styles, different cultures, different approaches, and it's its own thing. And yet it has its roots everywhere.
What you're attempting to do is evoke something through the music you're doing. I don't care what you're playing, and I don't care if you're playing spoons, you know, and that's all. That's the idea, and that gets achieved on a good night.
Actually, some of the greatest comments are from kids when we play in schools that Kathy's arranged, and some of the responses are pretty incredible from kids who come to the experience pretty unbiased.
The piece is called Two Paths because there was a book I was reading at the time by Edward de Bono, and there were parts of the piece where I was having problems resolving, and by reading this book, it made me think differently, that there was two options to a problem. There's never just one answer to a given situation. Oh, it sounds like an old fish. I don't know why these guys keep on kicking it around. You know,
It's fun.
I was going.
Great
Well,
piece to play.
I go. Is this piece dead? And I go, no, it just smells funny. These guys keep on. No, you guys breathe a lot of life into it.
Well, it goes
They
both
did.
ways. I mean, it's such a powerful piece to play. We always get strong comments when we do at concerts, and we always save it as a closer because it's so.
Because it's a rock and roll piece.
It's a rock and roll.
It's a Chuck Berry piece.
And
Yeah.
people love that stuff.
Yeah.
And we love it.
I think this group is just starting out. The fact that we're going to celebrate our 10th anniversary is a very important milestone, but I think it has a valuable place in what we're trying to do in Canada. We consider ourselves a multicultural society. In Toronto, at least, we see more and more immigrants and people of Asian background. They are part of the fabric of our society, and I think their music is going to be part of the fabric of our society.
I think the combination will gradually lead to a type of world music that is not just superficial in the way that it's so often done today.
The challenge is partly in imagining what it is that we can do. The big challenge to me is in the vision and imagining what the limits are. Because once you start to feel comfortable with that and start to build up your own tradition, then you start to wonder, well, what's next? What can we really aim for? What is it that we can achieve? And that's the real challenge, the challenge of the future.
The Evergreen Club Gamelan Ensemble will be releasing a new CD later